He was kind of a throwback. Kind of seminary student someone would probably find in the 40s or the 50s or even the 60s. And a lot of young men felt the call of God in the face of the draft. But he had gone right from high school to college to seminary. Most of his seminary friends were older. What's referred to as second career, some even third career. But he was unlike them in another rather remarkable way. They all wanted to get calls in that fancy suburban church where they could maintain some level of anonymity and, of course, get a bigger paycheck. But not him. He wanted to return to his roots. He had grown up on a farm outside a small city. And that's where he wanted to return. He felt that's the people he knew the best. And so he was ecstatic when he got a call to a small rural congregation, about 50 families. When he arrived, he threw himself into his task. He set some ambitious goals. One was to visit every family in the congregation in his first year. Well, he soon learned that may not be as easy as he thought. He didn't realize all of the tasks a parish pastor had to undertake. He was preparing for confirmation in the fall. He was looking for some Bible study that he could do for the adults. He was having to do worship planning, and then, of course, sermon preparation. He wanted to preach good sermons for the folks. He even found himself occasionally doing janitorial work, cleaning up after people had been there. And then, of course, there were the meetings. He never could quite figure out how a small church could have that many meetings. And he soon learned that most of the meetings really weren't for the purpose of accomplishing something. They were more of a social gathering. People would start out in one direction, and pretty soon they'd be headed off in another. He also learned that if you go to a meeting and the first words out of the person running the meeting is, let's check our calendars to see when we can meet again, that's a pretty good indication that they really aren't all that interested in doing business. But he was working his way through the alphabet. And one Wednesday night, he got to Earl and Betty. So he called them on the phone and was going to make an appointment to go and visit with them the next day. And Earl answers the phone, and Earl had an interesting way of answering the phone. When he answered, he just said, "Yeah." Now, because this young preacher had grown up in a rural community, he knew exactly what that meant. That meant that Earl had important things to do, so whoever was calling, get to the point. So the pastor said, "Oh, I'm the new pastor. I was just wondering if I could come on and visit with you and Betty." Well, there was a pause on the phone. Earl goes, "Well, I got some hay that I got to get baled. The weather's supposed to be turning this week, and I don't want that to get rained on. So I'll make you a deal. Come on out and give me a hand. And after we're done, Betty, she'll cook up a nice supper, and then we can chat." Well, the young preacher didn't know if he wanted to spend the whole day with Earl and Betty. But he thought, no, this is why I came to this community. So he said, okay. Well, make sure you're dressed. And you got to get a good pair of gloves. Because that was back in the day they made the square bales. He said, you know, that twine will cut right into your hands after a while, especially if you've grown a little soft. So early the next morning, the new preacher shows up at Earl and Betty's house and jumps out of his car, his new pair of gloves he just gotten at the hardware store in his hands, and he looks around. He doesn't see Earl, but he sees an elderly fellow sitting up on the hay wagon. It was hooked to the baler. It was hooked to the tractor. And so he walked over and introduced himself, and all the old fellow sitting on the hay wagon said was, yeah, I know who you are. Well, he wanted to pursue that a little further, but at that point, Earl comes bounding out of the house. He says, okay, ready to get at it? He said, this here is Pete. Pete's my hired help. He said, he'll tell you what you need to do. So you jump up there on the wagon and I'll head out to the field. Well, the young preacher wanted to inform Earl that this wasn't his first rodeo. He thought, no, humility. So he just jumps up on the hay wagon. Now, as a kid, he had done that a lot, and he knows that when the tractor starts pulling and then the baler comes and then the trailer comes, that there's a little clink, clink, clink in that. And if you're not paying attention, you could end up off the back. So he was holding on pretty good, and sure enough, old Earl starts up and pulls away with a big jerk. And he sees Earl turn around, kind of hoping that maybe the young preacher was laying on the ground. But he wasn't. He held on tight. Off to the field they went. They worked all day, all morning, and by about noon, the trailer was full of bales as Pete would throw them back, and the young preacher would stack them. So they headed back to the farmyard. And they stopped in the middle of the farmyard, and Earl jumps off. He unhooks the trailer, pulls it up a little bit in front of another trailer that's empty, and shuts the tractor down. And he meets Pete and this new preacher and says, there's some lunch just inside in a cooler inside the garage. He says, Betty made some sandwiches and there's some ice cold water in there. He says, you guys have a good lunch, and I'm going to run in town. He says, I got a belt on the old baler. It looks like it's about ready to go, and I don't want to get back out there and have to shut down the field and then go buy a belt. So I'm going to run into town, and you guys have some lunch. With that, Earl jumps in his pickup and heads off. Well, the young preacher turns around and he sees Pete's got the cooler in his hands. He's going over and sits down underneath this big old tree that provides a wonderful shade, and leans up against the trunk of the tree, and he opens up the cooler and holds out a sandwich for the young preacher. The preacher looks at it. Oh, egg salad, my favorite. And then Pete hands him up a little bottle of ice cold well water. The young preacher sits down on the other side of the cooler. Between bites, he tries to have a conversation with Pete. So, are you retired? Pete kind of looks at the young preacher and goes, do I look retired to you? Well, then the young preacher knew that this was going to be sort of like pulling teeth. But he wasn't about to give up. He goes, well, you always worked for Earl? Ah, Pete said, I do odd jobs around. People call me on the phone and say, hey, can you help me out? I'm usually available. So that's what I do. Well, this is what you always done? At that moment, the preacher noticed that there looked to be just a little bit of a smile on Pete's face. Just the corners going up just a little bit. Pete said, "No, I used to be a preacher." Just like you. Well, that took the young preacher back. Well, what congregations? Oh, so I served a few, most of them, like the one you're serving, small town. I never had a desire to want to be one of them big, flashy pastors, one of those big, flashy churches. In fact, he said the last one I served was the one you're serving now. Well, really? Well, did you retire from there? Once again, the young preacher thought he saw just a little bit of a smile. As old Pete goes, "Well, not really. Actually, they threw me out." Well, that had the young preacher's attention, and he desperately wanted to know more about that story, but he was also somewhat reluctant to want to press the issue. And so that last statement just kind of hung in the air, sort of like the hot humidity on that late July day. Pete just let it hang there. For what seemed like an eternity, probably just a few seconds. And then Pete looked at the preacher and said, "Would you like to know that story?" Well, yeah, the young preacher said, "I'd like to know that story, but I don't want to pry." Well, old Pete said, "I'm surprised you haven't heard it already." You see, I was just like you, real energetic. I sort of saw this as my last call. When I got here, like you, I threw myself into it, visiting folks. I even went to some of the places in town, like the VFW and the American Legion. I introduced myself. Went to a couple of the service clubs, introduced myself. I even went to the high school and introduced myself to the principal. And it wasn't long after that, he said, that people started calling me. American Legion called me and wanted to know if I'd do the opening prayer for their memorial service. The VFW called me and wanted to know if I'd do the opening prayer for their Veterans Day celebration. Service clubs called me and wanted to know if I'd do some sort of presentation. They all have to have a program. In a small town like this, it's hard to find people who've got something worth saying. I even got a call one day from the principal of high school. The fellow that had been announcing their football games. Well, he was retiring, and he and his wife were moving down further south where the winters were a little kinder. And he wanted to know if I would do it. He says, "You're a public speaker and all. Plus," he said, "I've seen you in all the football games." So next thing you know, I'm announcing football games. And he said, "That's what people in a small town do when they like you. They ask you to do things." And I even started a Wednesday little gathering at noon. And I'd invite folks, and they would come, and I would read the text for the Sunday, and I'd just see what their input was. And sometimes, I would hear some things that I would work into my sermon. Well, some people would come and go, but there were three that were pretty consistent. Bob, who owns the bank. Fred, who runs the elevator. And Tom, he owns the hardware store. In fact, that's probably where you got them fancy new work clothes you got. Well, one Wednesday I came, and the text I wanted to focus on was from the prophet Isaiah. Now it seems that God had a bird under his saddle. He was sort of fed up with people pretending to be holy, who didn't understand what worship was really all about. He looked at the young preacher and said, "You remember that text from the 58th chapter? It's where God sends Isaiah to tell the people, is this the fast that I choose? What, did you show up in, I suppose for them it would have been the synagogue, and you act all holy, and then as soon as you leave the place, you cheat your neighbor? You strike with a fist? Is that the kind of fast I'm looking for?" God said. "No, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people who are willing to release the yoke of injustice, to fight on behalf of the oppressed, to share your bread with the hungry, your clothing with those who are naked, to welcome the stranger into your house. And when you do these things," God says, "then your light shall shine forth like the dawn. Then you shall call on my name, and I will answer, here I am." So what God was saying is that worship isn't what we do here. It's what we do out there. Well, for some reason, these three guys seem to take exception to that. Bob said, "No, what's important is that people got to be in worship. They got to be there on Sunday mornings. That's what matters to God." I kept trying to hold up. But no, what matters to God is not what we do here, but what we do out there. But they kept insisting, no, it's only what we do in here. And I don't know what Pete said. Something just kind of snapped. Maybe it was just pent up frustration from all of those years of listening to people justify all sorts of crazy behavior by simply pretending to be holy. I don't know really what happened. But all of a sudden, I found myself going after words coming out of my mouth. Obviously, it hadn't been filtered through my brain. And I looked right at Fred, and I said, "Fred, I talk to the farmers in this community, and they all tell me the same thing about you. They tell me that when they take their grain to your elevator, the dockage on the grain is always much higher than it's ever been, and they think, quite frankly, you got your thumb on the scale. And yet there you are every Sunday morning sitting right up there in the front row like God doesn't see another single thing that you do. And you, Bob, you drive around this town in a car that's fancier than anybody else owns. And your wife, she's got more jewelry in a jewelry store, and she's got diamonds the size of grapes on her hands. And yet every time the church wants to do something for the sake of the community, you're always the first one to stand up and grab the microphone and say, "No, we can't afford that." Well, they wanted to build a youth room for the youth because our kids in the town don't have anywhere to really kind of hang out. And the youth committee said, "Let's build them a youth room and put a big TV in there and some nice furniture, maybe even a pool table." You were the first one. You grabbed the microphone. You said, "We can't afford that." Some of the older people simply asked if we could get some pads for those old, hard oak pews, kind of soften a little bit. You again were the first one. You grabbed the microphone and said, "No, we can't afford that." And you know what, Bob? People listen to you because they think that you're a big giver to this church, but you and I both know that ain't true. You hardly give anything. And yet there you are on Sunday morning, right up in the front row. When it comes to communion, you go up to that rail and you hunker down lower than any of them. But God doesn't see another single thing you do. And you don't. You must be doing pretty well at that hardware store. It's the only one within 20 miles. And yet when you lock the door at night, you don't go home. You go to the bar. And most nights you stay there until it's closed. And then you go home and you scream at your wife. She's scared to death of you. Yet there you are. In church every Sunday, sitting right up there in the front. He said, this is exactly who Isaiah is addressing. It's people like you. You're nothing but a bunch of hypocrites. Well, I guess Pete was done telling his story. He looks over at the young preacher. His mouth's hanging open, his eyes are as big as saucers. The young preacher said, how did that go over? Well, old Pete said, not particularly well. Says, I got back to the church later that night, and I noticed some cars parked in the church parking lot. And I thought I'd check the calendar. I didn't know that there was any meeting scheduled. And I know one of the cars belongs to Bob because that one sticks right out. So just to make sure, I went into Parsonage and checked the calendar. Well, there was no meeting scheduled. But I thought I'd better go over and check it out because, they want the pastor in all those meetings. And so I was about to open up the door when I heard a knock. I opened up the door, and there was the president of the congregation. He looked at me and he said, we had an emergency meeting of the council. You are hereby terminated. You got 30 days to get out of the parsonage. And he just turned and walked away. Well, old Pete said, I don't know how long I stood there, but it had been like I'd been hit with a 2x4 upside the head. I was truly stunned. I didn't know what I was going to do. No idea. And for a few days, I walked around like that. And then, my phone started ringing. First call was from somebody who said, I got an apartment above my garage. You can certainly use it. Nobody's lived there since my son moved out and went away to college. I won't charge you any rent, he said, but I need your help around here. Maybe you could just give me a hand, call it kind of like in kind. Well, I knew I needed a place to stay, old Pete said, so I took him up on it. Then other people started calling me, and they all started the conversation the same way. We heard what happened. News in a small town travels pretty fast. And so they started offering me, some little jobs, and they paid me. One of them, he said, was Earl. So pretty soon I found that I was making enough money to meet my needs. I don't have a lot of needs, what Pete said. And a few months went by, and I was still kind of struggling with what I ought to be doing. But I noticed some things changed. I was in the diner one day having coffee, and I heard some farmers talking. They all said the same thing. They said how they noticed the dockage on their grain was going down. And the weight seems to be back to where it should have been. And then one day, he said, I was walking down the main street and I saw a car drive by. I could have swore Bob was driving it because it looked like his wife in the passenger seat. But it wasn't that big, flashy car he had. It was just an ordinary old Ford like the rest of us drive. Sure enough, they parked and got out and it was Bob. I also noticed his wife wasn't wearing all that jewelry anymore. To be quite honest with you, she looked happier. I don't think she ever wanted that stuff. I suppose you noticed that you got a pretty fancy youth room at the church over there. Big screen TV, nice furniture, pool table. They even got some of them things that kids play on. I don't know what they're called. Apparently, somebody gave an anonymous donation. And I also suppose you noticed that there's some pads on all those pews. It was another anonymous donation. But Tom is probably the biggest story of all. All I know is that he left town for a few weeks. When he came back, he was a different person. In fact, now he's got another sort of part-time job. He does all the fixing on the old abuse shelter. If they need something fixed, he takes some of his supplies out of his store and he goes over there and he fixes it. I also know that his wife is now working there full time, helping women in abusive situations. And I also know this about Tom. He finds a young man in town that's spending too much time at the bar and got a bit of a hot temper. He befriends him. You can see him talking. A little while later, their spouse will come into the store. And I know that because Tom asked me to fill in while he's busy. And they'll give him a big hug. I know what that's about. So old Pete said, I didn't realize something. I didn't realize that my ministry didn't start until I was fired. Wouldn't have been the way I would have done it. I guess God had a different plan. And so now, I'm just around. Reminding people just by my presence. It's what we do out there that matters. Besides that, I'm still announcing football games. The preacher turns to me and said, do you ever talk to those three guys about what happened? What would I say? No, when I see those three guys, we pass on the street, they just nod at me. Me, I just nod back. See, sometimes young preachers got to realize that the Word of God isn't always words. See what that nod means? It means everything's going to be just fine. As long as you remember it's not what we do in here. It's what we do out there. Well, that time Earl pulls back into the yard, jumps out of his pickup with his brand new belt. goes over to the cooler, takes his sandwich out, devours it in about 2 bites. That's how farmers eat when there's something more important that needs to get done. Took a big gulp of water. He looked at the young preacher and said, "Well, you ready to get back at it?" The young preacher looked over at Pete, looked up at Earl, and just nodded his head.